Bob Gillespie, full professor, The Ohio State University School of Music. The values of orchestra programs. Why should school systems offer string instruction as a part of their music curriculum? I'd like to discuss 5 different reasons of why it's critical that string programs are prevalent in public school music curriculums. There was a study done in 1997 by a professor from the University of Florida, Camille Smith. And in this study, she surveyed school systems, not individual school buildings, but school systems, to determine what was available for students in the music curriculum. And what she found out was that only 20% of school systems in America included string and orchestral instruction as a part of their regular school music program. That means only 1 out of every 5 school systems in America at that point were offering string instruction. We often today talk about the No Child Left Behind Act and its impact on the schools. Clearly, at the moment, we're leaving many children behind by not offering them the option of choosing strings in their school systems. So let's talk about why they really should value and include string instruction. The first point I'd like to make is that truly, let's say that a school system values the arts. They understand its importance in the life of a child and adolescence. Let's say they even have a terrific band program, they've got a terrific choir program, general music, they could have guitar classes, and an entire array of music curriculum offerings. However, for some reason, they don't have strings. That means really their curriculum is not complete. Therefore, I like to use the analogy with superintendents and school boards that it's like offering a math curriculum but not offering algebra. It's offering a science curriculum, but there's no chemistry. And we wouldn't think of having those kinds of curricula at all in the schools. Therefore, we really should have string instruction. Not every child is attracted to the sound of a wind instrument or a percussion instrument. Not every child likes to sing as well. So if we value the arts, we need to not leave those children behind who don't choose those particular ways to express themselves musically, but rather may be attracted to string instruments. And therefore, as one superintendent told me a few years ago, he said, of course we have to have an orchestra program. The orchestra is the Shakespeare of the music curriculum. Another superintendent I was meeting with in the Detroit public schools said the reason he wanted string instruction in the schools was that he saw the arts as one of the major hooks of keeping his children in his school system attending every day. If they could fall in love with an instrument, an art form or something, that would promote them to attend school and stay in school. And so by all means, he needed to have a string program. So my first reason is that really a music program is not complete. We don't have the entire recipe put together for the product of a wonderful musical art form. My second point, every major composer has written original music for the orchestra. If you talk to the man on the street, for example, who are some of the greatest composers who have ever lived? We'd think about perhaps maybe Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, and of course people would say Bach and Mozart, and they would remember Beethoven because they saw the Dog movie and so forth, but they would consider them perhaps as some of the greatest composers that have ever lived in the history of our culture. Therefore, when you look at the music that they actually wrote, they composed many, many more original pieces for strings and orchestra than for any other medium. For example, how many symphonies did Beethoven write? He wrote 9 symphonies. How many symphonies for another chorus or a band did he write? Not as many for sure. Instruments hadn't been developed, as well, to the extent where he could be writing on a regular basis for choral and orchestra works and so forth. That was still being developed. So more of those great composers have written original music than for anything else. Haydn, how many symphonies, my goodness, did that man write? He had way too much time on his hands. He wrote 104 symphonies, which is terrific. So if we really want to have a complete art experience for our children, wouldn't they want to be exposed, and wouldn't you, as an administrator or a parent, want your child to experience the greatest masterworks from the greatest composers in their original form? I often am told by some music teachers, well, or superintendents, we've got arrangements that we play. An arrangement is a person's interpretation of a masterwork. For example, we couldn't afford to have a Picasso at school to enjoy, so we'll just look at the works of Picasso's students. That doesn't really make a first-hand experience for those students, because in the orchestra they can actually feel, they can handle. Beethoven wrote those wonderful melodies and so forth, and they can actually create them as they originally were written on their string instruments or within the symphonic orchestra. So a complete program would include orchestra, and it would include those great masterpieces. A third reason, an orchestra really can't enhance the band curriculum, because the wind and percussion students will not only have the great opportunity to play in the band, but they may also play in the full symphonic orchestra and play those great masterpieces. Their musical experience will be different, not better or worse than what they're doing in the band, but simply a different experience. There will typically only be 3 or 4 flutes at maximum, only 3 or 4 clarinets, 2 or 3 trombones and trumpets and so forth, as opposed to the band, which has the riches of so many more students playing those instruments. So by the wind and percussion students moving into the orchestra setting, they get more personalized instruction. They're working in a smaller group. They take those enhanced skills and musical experiences back to the band and enrich the band with those new kinds of activities that they've been involved in. Plus, if our purpose of music education is really to give as many students the opportunity to experience the arts through music, wouldn't we want to offer them a wide array of different kinds of experiences so that the band could come over and play in symphonic orchestras and then take those skills and those personal experiences back? In fact, when I was teaching in the schools, one of the band directors at a school I was teaching at said by all means he wanted all of his winds and percussion at all possible to be involved in the school orchestra, because it was yet another musical experience that would enhance their education. In a likewise fashion, orchestras can enhance the choral curriculum by combining strings with the choir. For example, when you look at some of the greatest masterworks that have been written by the best composers around, they have written for many pieces for both choir and strings combined. Bach did, he wrote his masses. Schubert did, and in writing his great, Beethoven in his great choral works and so forth, same as Haydn as well. What is it for a choir student to experience performing those musics with a keyboard only versus as the composer originally intended, which was with an orchestra? If you probably once again ask the man on the street, what's a famous choir piece? And you put it in those, he or she might say something like, well, I don't know the real title, but it's something about Hallelujah in there. And what he or she may be referring to is the Hallelujah chorus, written by a great master composer, Handel. And Handel intended it for strings, a small, very small wind section, and choir. What is the experience going to be for that choir student and that choir director, teacher at school, to be able to teach the original form as it was intended by the composer versus playing it with a keyboard? it's another enriched kind of musical experience for them. High schools on a regular basis throughout the country also, for example, do Broadway productions as a part of their theater and their drama program, and they're always looking for the musical accompaniment. They have an option. If we have an school orchestra, we can give the school orchestra that experience of playing with a Broadway musical, for example, West Side Story, as opposed to the school system having to pay for professional musicians to come in and subsidize the drama performance of West Side Story. So it's another way of enriching the choral program and while also what students in general at the school can experience. School system I was working with over the last few years tried to convince me that they were too small. They didn't have enough students to have an orchestra program. So I had them explain to me what they were actually doing in the program, and as a result I developed a relationship with them, and they hired me as a violinist to come in along with some other professional players to accompany in the springtime their choral productions. I developed such a strong relationship with them that I did it for 10 years. And they were still using the argument at the end that the school system was too small, and number two, they couldn't afford to hire a string faculty member. So I went back to my office, I added up the amount of money over 10 years they had paid me and my professional performing colleagues to perform for them in the spring, took that figure back to them and showed them that over a 10-year period, they paid those musicians more than the salary of one person that could have come in and helped create an orchestra program that their school students would be able to experience. That system now has a full-time string teacher. Another system I was working with, I called up because they didn't have a school orchestra program, and I got the superintendent on the phone, and I told the superintendent, oh my gosh, what a great music program you've got. And he said, oh yes, our band actually is going to be marching in the Rose Parade this coming fall. We're doing this, and our choir is doing this. And I said, oh my gosh, this is terrific. It's just so bad that you don't have a complete music program. And he about jumped through the phone at me, and he said, well, we don't have anybody who would be interested in a string program here. I said, well, that could be. How about if I bring my youth orchestra and we do a concert and you come to the concert, and let's just see if if there are some students who might be interested in there. Maybe you're right, maybe there aren't any students in your school system. And so he said, okay, you're on. And so I worked it out with the youth orchestra directors and so forth. We brought the youth orchestra over. Superintendent was a man of his word. He showed up at the concert, and by the end of the concert, the students were so excited by the music we had played, plus we had given them the opportunity to come up and touch and feel and make sounds on the string instruments, that at the end of the performance, I asked how many students here in this auditorium of 1,000 students would be interested in exploring the idea of playing a string instrument. Hands shot up everywhere. Superintendent saw this and came to me after the concert and said, okay, I now understand. You were right, we have kids here. That was 7 years ago, and now there are 2 full-time string teachers in that school system. So, does the orchestra program offer something that students are interested in? Yes, evidently. My last point, number 5, orchestras offer hands-on creation, learning through the arts. So rather than simply viewing or listening to music, we can actually create it ourselves. We can learn how to make our own music through composing, through improvisation. There are so many school garage bands, we call them, around, kids that are not actually involved in the formal music program. In fact, we know from data that only at the high school level, 18% of schools, of students at those schools, are involved actually in the formal music program. However, at those schools, there's a number of kids playing rock and roll at home, playing in their garage bands, and doing and so forth. We should have a place for them in the school orchestra and in the school music program as well. That vernacular music would allow them that hands-on creative opportunity that would enhance even their performance opportunities on their guitars and everything else that they're doing. For example, I have a good friend whose name is Mark Wood, who's one of the leading rock and roll violinists in the country. He just played on Beyonce's album that came out. He completed the last Rolling Stones tour playing with them. The previous Winter Olympics, he played on TV commercials and so forth for them. And now what he's doing is taking that experience into the schools. And he and I have done a number of workshops with schools, just getting kids to be interested in vernacular music through string instruments. So that's yet another way, through that hands-on creating, that we can incorporate strings into the school orchestra program. Final point. Some people will say, well, if we don't have a school orchestra program and we now add one, that we're going to take away kids from the band program. We're going to take away kids from the choral program, and those programs are going to suffer. However, 2 points. What is the purpose of music education in the schools? Are we supposed to be building band kingdoms and choir kingdoms and so forth? Or are we supposed to be offering music education for as many students that we possibly can reach in a tax-supported curriculum? That really is the philosophy. So let's say, oh, we do lose 3 kids out of the band, and they go to the orchestra. They're still having an arts experience, and we have just completed a study that'll be coming out next year where we surveyed over 100 school programs that had started new string programs within the last 10 years. We identified those programs, and then we surveyed the bands, the choirs, and those string teachers in those programs to see if actually the enrollment in the overall music education program decreased or increased. And what do you expect? Of course, there were more students across the school systems that were involved in the arts curriculum as a result. The bands didn't suffer, the choirs didn't suffer. We simply brought more kids into this hands-on learning kind of arts experience. Isn't that what we're really all about? So please repeat after me. Strings are important, schools are important, and yes, we should have string programs.